Welcome one and all to yet another juicy, red-hot, sizzling Kings of War battle report. This time it's the Abyssal Dwarves versus Orcs. And to guide you on this journey we have Mighty Arrow, which will be guiding your eyeballs around the screen. We also have my face in the corner, and it's a cold day so I'm wearing a hat just for a little bit of extra excitement this week. So let's look what we have here. We've got 2,250 points each side for Orcs versus Abyssal Dwarves in the Occupy scenario. So this is the one where there are 3 objectives along the middle of the table, and there's 1 in each half, and the aim is to get 1 victory point at the end of the game for each one of the centerline objectives you are sitting on. And if you are sitting on the one in your opponent's half and controlling that one, then you get 2 victory points. The one in your own half isn't worth anything to you other than depriving points for your opponent. So 2,250 points. This is a bit of a list test for possibly the last 2nd edition tournament that I'll be playing in, which is in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll see if this list is any good or whether I want to hurry up and paint the decimators that are actually behind me and get them involved in things. So let's go straight to my list, shall we? So let's look at the Orcs first. Okay, here we have some Gore Riders. We have a Crudger on Slasher. We have some Orclings. I think these are actually Whip's playmates, the Orclings, and there is Whip right there. So he gets a bonus to his spells because of the Orcling buddies that he has. There is a Wardrum. There is a Chariot Horde. There is a Troll Horde, and I believe they have Dwarven Ale. There is a Horde of Axe, and these ones have the Potion of the Caterpillar. And there is another Wardrum behind there, and there are a couple of God Speakers as well around the place. So they have lots of healing abilities. I think one of them might have the Shroud of the Saint as well for even more. And there is a Flagger there who has the healing charms. There's a bit of a Healy theme going on here. And over on this side there is another Horde of Axe, and these ones have the Brew of Sharpness. There is a little troop of Skulks, a regiment of Axe, and I think that might be the other God Speaker there. What have we got over here? I think that's the God Speaker there, and there's the Flagger. I think that's actually part of the unit, that guy. So I think there's just 2 of the characters over here, and one of them over on the left as I look at it. And in the Abyssal Dwarf forces we have the Immortal Guard Regiment. We've got Bassoes in here, partially obscured by my little screen. We've got Bracky, who is kind of turned sideways, so in the first turn he can just pivot on the spot and go straight forward and get a little bit of extra distance because of the shape of his base with being individual. Then we've got a regiment of half-breeds, and they have the Dwarven Ale. We've got a troop of gargoyles, but these are actually Bassoes' special gargoyles this time because there were some extra points left over, so why not? We'll see how that does with the extra crushing strength, so maybe more of a threat. Then we've got Infernoc. We've got 2 hordes of lesser obsidian golems. This one here has Blessing of the Gods, big crystal at the back. The one with the small crystal at the front has the Pipes of Terror. We've got a Dragonfire team behind them. We've got Dravak and a regular Ironcaster with the Shroud of the Saint, so he's up to heal 6. So lots of healing for all this goodness. Over here we've got another regiment of Immortal Guard and a mortar. And there is actually a second mortar. Are we able to see it? Oh yeah, it's down here. So there's the other mortar. So there's 2 heavy mortars in this. Okay, so the objectives. On the centre line, here they are, all 3 of them, straight down the middle. And there is the one that I will be defending and hoping my opponent doesn't claim. And there is the one that my opponent will be trying to prevent me from claiming. So let's just go back to the wide shot because I want to show you my deployment strategy here. So with the objectives, the main little area I want to claim is this point here, because there's my really valuable objective, and there is a 1-pointer very close to it. There's another 1-pointer there. So that little triangle is quite important. There's a lot of points for me in that little area. There's also a juicy one. This one here is not too far away from the middle, but I'm pretty much going to ignore that and ignore this one I will not be disappointed if my opponent holds both these objectives, even though it's worth a total of 3. I'm hoping to claim these 3 here for a total of 4 victory points. And to do that, I'm going to use this one regiment of Immortal Guard, because if I don't deploy them here, my opponent can quite happily just use this troop of skulks and move them up and sit them on an objective, and that's really all he needs. He can just pick another cheap unit to bring over here to control one of the other objectives. I think even War Drums can perhaps hold objectives. I think they're classed as monsters. But even if that's not the plan, there's also this regiment here that's quite inexpensive that can just not take part in the game quite happily. They're cheap enough for that role, and the skulks can still sit on an objective and shoot into the middle of the table. So I need something over there so that the Orcs need to actually commit some forces over here, because you wouldn't just want one regiment versus the Immortal Guard over the really valuable objective. That's too risky. And I've got a mortar over there as well, which is a threat, which can potentially wipe out some of these smaller units in one hit. So just trying to encourage my opponent to put a significant number of forces over there, and then I've gone for just everything in this section here, because I just want to control this area. And I've got Basusu and Braki, who are really, along with the gargoyles, the ways that I can counter the speed that my opponent has with the chariots. I think the chariots, they're quite hard-hitting. I don't think they have any artifacts, actually, but the slasher, winged slasher, has the Brew of Haste, I think, so it has extra speed. And something else around here has extra speed as well. One of the other units, I can't remember whether it's the cavalry or the chariots, has the Whip of Celerity, I think, so they have extra speed as well. So they're faster than everything I've got here, but I have got lots of surge potential, because I've got Draki, or Dravak, mixing up Dravak and Braki there. So Dravak with his surge 10 with elite, and the regular Ironcaster with surge 8. So I can potentially surge one of these units a reasonable distance to get into the enemy. But they've got some quite hard-hitting meat in there as well, so I don't want them to be able to multi-charge and take out anything unless it's on my terms. Okay, so let's just go forward again, now that we've gone through the basic strategy. And turn 1. So I think the Skulks actually had a Vanguard move that they're able to perform before the game, so we'll get to them in a moment. But the Orcs elect to go first, because they don't want to take a mortar blitz and then allow me to move forward with everything. Because really, I don't have the speed edge here. So if my opponent can push forward immediately, if I want to move forward even the tiniest bit, I'm going to be going to within charge range of some of these units. And when you've got flyers, going first lets you set up your angles nicely. But the way this is positioned, it's really to counter Basusu, I think, because Basusu has the option flying straight forward and landing around here somewhere, but with the way this is positioned, Susan can't actually land out of its arc now. So that's the reason that that is positioned there. However, it does mean that it's limited in what it can see along this line, so it can't see anything in the kind of in the middle of the table now, which is good because I can now advance without worrying about being flanked by this. So Susan already doing valuable work even just with the deployment position. Because when you don't have anything that can just turn and deal with an individual flyer like that, and you've got a big flyer that can't just turn around before it charges, something landing in its flank is just going to be annoying to you. And you may even end up having to just ignore it completely, which you don't want. You don't want Susan behind your lines with a free reign to charge anything, to either make one of the charges a multi-charge or to try and take out things like a war drum, which greatly boost nearby units. And you can see that there's not much that's in range. Braki will have a charge onto the Orclings, and the Gargoyles, I think, can't see anything that they can charge. The Chariot Horde can be seen over these hills, but I don't think the Gargoyles are in range to actually charge them. Over on this side, the Trolls have moved up further than everything else. Obviously they have to be wary of being surged into, but you can't factor that in too much, because if you put yourself out of guaranteed surge range, then you're not going to be able to move at all. You just have to be able to decide how much surge is likely to happen, and are you in a reasonable position to not be surged into on average. And even then, if you're staying out of average surge, sometimes you end up staying too far away from the enemy. You have to put yourself in a position where you yourself can charge, otherwise you're going to be toasted here, because I've definitely got the shooting edge with my mortars against this lot. There's only really the skulks that are any kind of threat. There's a bit of lightning bolt action and fireball. Fireball's not very long range, and the lightning bolt over here on whip isn't that potent. I think he has about lightning bolt 4 with the horde next to him boosting it. So there's how it's looking, and the skulks actually move up a little bit more before the end there. And I think they try to shoot something, but they fail to do any wounds. Turn 1 for the Abyssal Dwarves. So, Bracky has charged off into the Orclings. Now, I'm not sure whether he should have been able to technically do that, because when I was looking at the pictures beforehand, before doing the video, I thought he's actually pressed right up against this unit. So when he pivots, he's actually inside the unit. So is he technically then charging through them to make that move? So maybe he shouldn't have been allowed to do that charge, but he didn't kill them. He did 4 wounds. So maybe he should have just been able to block them, which is what I wanted, really. That was the reason he was going in for the charge. Because I want to push the half-breeds up here without the threat of being charged by the Orclings, because they are there to counter the chariots, and you'll see how that works out in a moment. So you can see that Basuso is charged up there as well. And the mortar actually wavers this big slasher immediately. So that's good. I don't have to worry about any of my units being charged by the slasher in the first turn now. 6 wounds and a very big nerve roll for the waver. So Susan charges into the Gore Riders, and just blocking them in and really just doing damage on them. So they won't have their Thunderous Charge on the counter charge, obviously, so I'm pretty confident that Susan will win the fight against them. Bracky isn't too worried about them. But I also want my characters to be this far forward, because I've got ideas for charging this chariot horde here, which I'll show you from this angle. So the gargoyles have moved up to block them in a bit, so they can't charge any of my units. The only way they could charge these golems is if all these other units move out the way. Because if they want to do a combo charge with the trolls, there isn't going to be enough space for them to physically get in there with a single pivot because of the way I've lined up the gargoyles. So if these chariots charge the gargoyles, even with falling back, I don't think they can get out of range of the half-breeds. Now, the half-breeds would of course be hindered by this wall if they were to charge the chariots. However, Bracky, who is down here at the moment, could join them in a multi-charge and end up sitting on the wall, so that the half-breeds wouldn't be hindered. And under those circumstances, I would quite like my chances of killing this chariot horde. I could even throw Basusu in there as well, because even if she takes damage on the counter-charge, she wouldn't actually need to fly to make it into there. Just with a nimble charge, she should be able to do it, unless the Orcs try very, very hard to block that. The other option for Basusu is to charge into the slasher next turn to just ground it and stop it flying and limit what it can do. So these golems were surged into the trolls. I had to use both my surge casters to get in there, and they make it into the trolls and do 7 damage. So this unit, I'm accepting that if my opponent wishes to kill them, they are dead, because this horde right here has the Potion of the Caterpillar, so they can charge through those woods without being hindered at all. So I'm accepting this unit will die. And when you see it from a wider angle, there we go. So it's sacrificing a unit for better position here, because if both these units charge in here, they're going to be very, very congested, because this unit will be in the flank, so they're not going to be alongside each other. This unit will be in this blob right there, so there's going to be a limit to what kind of pivoting they can do, and they're going to be so far forward that however they turn, they're going to be flank charged by something, because I've got this horde of golems here and Infernoc. So even if they manage to wrangle it so that nothing's in the flank, which I'm not sure is possible after a flank charge here, even if they manage it, then I've got 2 surge casters. So if they think they've got nothing in the flank, they could end up with both in the flank. Because of course both these units can pivot and then still move and then be surged. So that unit, if they want to take this flank and take this unit off, okay, because I'm confident I'll kill them with this little pincer movement with all the surge I've got down here. And the trolls, they're already quite wounded, so I would potentially be able to start shooting them next turn. If I only need to do a single surge, I've got Fireball here that could shoot them, because they didn't regenerate that many wounds in the next turn, which you'll see, which hasn't come up yet. And the Dragonfire team here will be able to join in as well. So you can see what I was talking about. The chariots won't be able to physically fit in there because it's quite congested here, and the trolls would only move down far enough to actually allow the chariots to physically fit into the facing, which wouldn't give them enough room with a single pivot to actually make contact with the golems. So if the chariots want to charge, the trolls can't be involved. And I'm confident these golems will survive a single charge from any one unit. The other option for this horde here is to charge straight through the woods into these golems, which would leave them open because when they bounce off 1 inch, there's a potential surge in the flank from Infernoc there. So I wouldn't say they're totally screwed either way, but I think I've presented my opponent with difficult decisions, and that's what you want to do, really. You can't always force your opponent into making a decision that's going to ultimately be bad for them, but you can give them multiple options, all of which have some downsides. The other option, of course, is to just not charge in with this unit and keep them back and accept that the trolls will eventually die and try and keep the flanks protected as long as possible. But it's really difficult when there's all this surge around and 3 big, really dangerous shambling units. Over here, the Immortal Guard are just moving around a little bit just to make sure anyone that comes towards them is going to walk straight into this difficult terrain. Just because there's Immortal Guard, I do expect them to survive the game, but they want to live long enough so that the units over here can't feasibly leave and join in with the rest of the game because they have to stay here on the objectives. The other mortar, what does that do? Well, that one hits as well. Double mortar hit in the first turn. This one gets the maximum 10 damage onto that horde of axe. So that's very, very nice. And that means that I may not even have to look for all the different flank charges on them next turn, depending what kind of healing takes place. So there's how the battlefield is looking, and really this area, I think it's looking okay so far, the way I've got this set up. I'm liking it, I'm confident. Over this side, I'm not confident that these guys are going to survive at all, but it doesn't matter, because as long as I control this area, that'll be enough. Orc turn 2. So you can see my opponent decides that this is the better option, and I probably disagree, because a single charge on one of these units probably isn't going to kill them, and I think whatever this unit does, now that it's elected to go in and actually attack something in these circumstances, I think there's a good chance it's going to die next turn because of that. And whatever it did, if it charges in here, it's got Infernoc in the flank, it's got them in the front. If it charges in here, it'll kill them and then probably die. But if it charges in the flank here, this unit will almost certainly be killed. Even though they are inspired by Bracky and his 12-inch inspiring range, I think this unit would definitely die with the double charge there. So it would be a case of taking out this unit and then accepting that this horde will die afterwards. Because I think whatever they do, they are shortly going to be toast. So they could take a unit out with them, and with this move, I don't think they will. The chariots go into the gargoyles. Not much else for them to do, and they're kind of stuck there, so they're going to get attacked by the half-breeds next time. And everything else has just moved up a little bit to provide inspiring and some rallying with the war drum. And over on this side, a bit more advancing and repositioning going on. And you can see that the Orclings have gone back into Bracky and the Gore Riders back into Susan. And you can see the healing actually here. So this unit that were on 10 wounds are now back down to 5, and then ultimately down to 4 after the healing charm joins in as well. So they're looking a bit healthier. And look at this, Susan only takes 4 points of damage but becomes wavered. Bracky takes 3 and does not become wavered, thankfully, so I've still got one of these guys to join in, which is kind of annoying because I wanted both of them for my plan next turn, so that means Susan cannot block in the slasher or join in the charge on these chariots. So that means it's going to be a bit more dicey about whether I kill them or not next turn. And the gargoyles obviously die. So with that double charge I was talking about, with Bracky and half-breeds, Bracky would end up here. And what I've done recently with this army is I've found that whenever I double charge Bracky in with the half-breeds, they fail, then Bracky gets killed on the counter-charge, their unit then gets an overrun into the half-breeds and kills them as well. So it's a risk. Every time I charge in with him, I'm consciously aware of it now. and I just have to weigh up the odds of whether it's going to succeed and whether it's worth risking throwing them in together. Because if you're not going to succeed, you might as well just keep the hero out for a turn and keep them alive, because losing both units at once is never fun. Over here, 2 damage done onto this unit, which is very, very poor from the Orcs there, and 8 onto this unit, which is quite nice, but not enough to kill them. So, with the double charge there, they would almost certainly be dead now. And then my opponent would be struggling to position this horde somewhere here to avoid any kind of flank action, which would be very difficult. And that's that. So the Skulks didn't do any damage again. They tried to shoot the mortar this time. Turn 2 for the Abyssal Dwarfs. So these guys have just turned themselves to face that way a bit. And the reason for that is that anyone who charges them now, I think they've pivoted that way a tiny bit. Anyone who charges them is going to be exposing a flank or a rear to this side of the table where I've got golems. I don't really have any intention of following through on this threat, but it's a threat nonetheless. The mortar, what does it do? It kills the Skulks. So that's very important because my opponent now has nothing that can hold those 2 objectives and still participate in the game. They're only combat units now, and they're quite valuable combat units, at least the Horde is. So if they want to hold the objectives, they are stuck not fighting anything for most of the game now. So I do take off that Horde, with the golems in the front, Infernox surged into the flank, plenty of damage, off they go, and the trolls are gone as well. Second time of asking, these guys take out the trolls, and I think I also healed that unit a bit as well, I believe. I can't remember whether Infernox was surged in first time, whether I had no healing left over to use. We'll see when we get a different angle. The half-breeds and Dravak, I decided it was, and Braki should I say, I decided it was worth the risk here. But 11 damage and they do not kill the unit. They don't even waver them. So the risk, again, is not going to pay off. So it looks like he's going to be overrun, and then they're going to overrun into the unit because Susan wasn't able to charge the winged slasher, then that's going to be able to join in as well and double charge Breki and also overrun, and then have a double overrun. So that's going to be spicy, and I decided it was worth the risk, fully aware of what the risks were. So calling it a mistake, I don't know whether that would be arguable. You could arguably say it was a mistake, but it was calculated mistake. I just failed to kill them. I was fully aware of the risk involved. I just decided to go for it regardless. Over here, you can see Susan didn't really do anything because he's wavered. So the Orclings would have to charge in here to get out of the way. The Immortal Guard have gone into position so that the Orclings now have to decide whether to charge them or get charged, or whether they want to charge the flank of the half-breeds, which is an option for them as well. So, moving on to turn 3 for the Orcs. And this is over on the side with the objective that the Orcs are going for. The Horde with the Brew of Sharpness have charged into the Immortal Guard. They shouldn't take them out in one go though, so I'm quite happy that they're going to survive the turn. A War Drum goes into these Golems just to slow them down a bit. And you can see that the God Speaker has positioned itself just to inspire these units and to get in position maybe to do some fireballing, I think, as well. The Orclings charge into the Immortal Guard. And there's that terrible double charge I was talking about. So, Slasher into the flank and the Chariots into the front. They will both have a really easy overrun onto the half-breeds, which is really bad news, but I feel like it was worth that risk. 11 damage. Could have taken them out, and that would have been very, very happy indeed. And then I could have overrun with Breki to make sure that no one was going over him to get to them next turn. But alas, it didn't work out. And these heroes have just positioned themselves so that they can do some casting, I think. I think that was the standard bearers, he can't cast. But the God Speaker, I think, fireballed the golems, puts a bit of damage on them. I think I did heal them up a little bit. And then Whip, I think, joins in with the healing. I think he's got heal as well. So this guy, who was healed a little bit earlier as well, so he's only on 1 wound now, the slasher. So remember, he was up to 6 with the first mortar shot of the game. The Immortal Guard don't take much damage from the Orclings, as you'd expect. The Susu takes a bit more damage from the Gore Riders, but does not get wavered this time, so that's nice. She's now eligible to join in with the game, or just fight them again. And look at this. So, Chariot Horde, Slasher, into Bracky. 14 damage, double 1. However, because this was practice for a tournament, then we played this under those tournament conditions. So we used the same number of minutes on the chess clock, and there's a tournament reroll of 1 dice per game, which I reminded my opponent about because it's not in the tournament. If it was in the tournament, I would not be mentioning the fact that my opponent hadn't used their reroll yet. It's up to you if you want to remember that. So, because of that, one of the dice was rerolled, so Bracky is actually dead. So Bracky is toast, and of course, the half-breeds are dead as well as a result of that. So, always keep in mind if there's a reroll in the tournament, don't forget it. It's handy if you have a little token actually to represent the reroll, and then you put it to one side when you've used it, just so you don't forget about it. Just helps you to remember. And although as far as the chess clocks go, we're not going to be stopping if someone hits 0. We are just going to keep playing, because it is a list test as much as anything. So we want to keep playing and get used to the lists so that at a tournament you can then play faster once you know what you're doing a bit more. That's generally how we do these practice games. So these Immortal Guard take 8 damage, and the amount of damage being fairly high there, that's going to make up my mind that I am going to countercharge that unit. Because if I don't countercharge them, then it's not going to make too much difference, because I think the Immortal Guard are going to die next turn of combat, whatever happens. Whether they have to be hindered by this pool or not, I think the Immortal Guard will still die next turn. I think it's worth countercharging, doing a bit of damage, and maybe I could take them off with shooting at the end of the game. So it's not worth trying to cling on with them anymore, I think. I'll accept that they'll die next turn. So there's how the battlefield is looking right now. And what's my next move going to be? Well, these chariots are almost dead, so I don't need to surge anything into their flank. So one of these golem units can go into them and take them out. This one is going to have to kill the war drum that's parked in front of them. And then Infernock is going to be surged into this flyer. He's going to turn around, go forward 5 inches, and then I've got my 2 casters to surge him into there. And over here, the Immortal Guard are going to keep fighting the Orclings. Susan is probably going to keep going onto the Gore Riders. And that's that. So, turn 3 for the Abyssal Dwarves. And Basusan puts more damage on them and regens a little bit. She's not doing that well, actually. She's doing pretty poorly in terms of trying to kill them. So Infernock does get successfully surged in. I needed both my surge casters to do it, though. So it gets into the slasher, grounds it, and more importantly, blocks its line of sight. So it can't see over Infernock because he's such a big beastie and his base is so big. So that thing is now pinned in there. And the Immortal Guard actually kill the Orclings, which is a nice bonus. Although possibly not going to affect the game too much, because a lot of these units are reasonable distance from the objective. And the Orclings weren't really going to kill the Immortal Guard next turn anyway, because they're a point of damage. So it's going to affect the lives of the Gore Riders probably more than anything. Over here, the Immortal Guard do a little bit of damage to this horde, 4 to be precise, so we'll see if that's helpful at the end of the game. And this horde of obsidian golems who weren't healed because I had to use both my surge casters to get Infernock into the flyer. This unit killed off the horde of chariots and turned round to face those individuals up there. So this horde here is pretty close to both these objectives now. So if they end up pivoting, they can probably hold both of these just in case Infernock gets killed. This unit is on the middle objective. So I'm doing well with my mission here, which was to hold this triangle of objectives and just allow my opponent to sit on these two and just win, basically. So it's going well. Turn 4. Obviously the mortars hit nothing last turn because there would have been pictures. So the flyer decides to abandon Infernock and run away over there, which is probably wise. If you get into a slugfest with Infernock, who's defense 6, and even if you ultimately beat him, I've got a lot of other units around here, probably unlikely to kill Infernoc before the end of the game because he's so big and tough. I've got 2 healers right behind him as well, so you're not going to kill him, really. So the War Drum goes in there instead, which is going to prevent me from surging Infernoc after the flyer because I wouldn't be able to pivot in the direction to actually chase it. And down here, the Gore Riders have gone back into Susan. Over here, these units are repositioning a little bit. This unit can't move because they're sitting on a token. So if they want to come out, they would have to abandon that. And this Horde are going to try and finish off the Immortal Guard this turn. And they get healed a bit as well by this God Speaker. And my opponent has reached 0 minutes, 0 seconds at this stage, but we're going to continue. Gore Riders killed Basusan. And they are now staring down the Immortal Guard, who can charge them and hopefully finish them off next time. Over here, the Horde kill off these Immortal Guard right here, as expected. And they turn to face that way, but they're still pretty stuck as well because they are on the 2-point objective, so can they afford to move? Yeah, so it's looking like a bit of a standoff on this side now because neither side wants to advance off the objectives over there. This side is a bit more wild and unpredictable though. We'll see. Turn 4 for the Abyssal Dwarfs. So the Immortal Guard charge into the Gore Riders and kill them, which is nice. So had the Orclings still been alive, because remember the charge from Bracky at the start of the game was possibly not correctly done. He possibly should have only been able to block them and thus not do the extra 4 damage. So had I been required to kill the Orclings this turn, the Gore Riders would have still been alive, but I think they would have still been in difficult terrain. Let me have a look. I think they're still touching the terrain there. So when they charged out, they would have been hindered, so they probably wouldn't have killed the Immortal Guard next turn. So hopefully I think it still should have gone alright for me on that flank, regardless of those 4 damage that maybe shouldn't have been there. Over here you can see that Infernoc has put 2 damage onto the War Drum. These guys, so because the individuals were hiding from them and were out of the charge arc, I had to surge them up there to attack the God Speaker because I'm fed up of his healing ability. So he is now dead, and then the other caster healed up some wounds on this unit, I think. And this unit in the middle are just turning around, controlling this objective quite happily because the Orcs surely don't want to move off their 2-point objective to come over here. And the Dragonfire team does a bit of damage to the Horde, but not too much. And there's how it's looking. So it's looking like it might become quite static now because I'm really controlling this area. Slasher's facing the wrong way, and the Orcs don't have much left to actually fight with unless they abandon their post. So, turn 5 for the Orcs. The War Drum back into Infernoc. The Slasher flies straight up there and then turns round to face the battle again, so it can actually get involved in the game again in the last turn. And yeah, you can see it's looking at them. And if it could charge into them in the last turn, it could potentially kill them, so I'm going to have to heal them up next turn to make sure they will survive. Over here, these units aren't doing anything because they're quite happy sitting on their 3 points worth of tokens. And that's really going to be that. There is a bit of shooting done from... who is it that's done this? Was there any shooting put on them? I think they've taken an extra wound. I can't remember who it was, though. Probably a fireball from somebody. And turn 5 for the Abyssal Dwarves. So, healed up all the wounds on this Horde, moved them down off the hill a bit, and they are now controlling both these tokens. So, that one's worth 2, that one's worth 1. And these golems are controlling a 1-point objective as well. So as long as this unit doesn't miraculously die from full strength in the last turn, then I should be alright. And Infernoc manages to kill off the War Drum, and I think the Immortal Guard joined in with that as well. So Infernoc is also holding this objective, which is a 1-pointer, but the 2-pointer is only held by this unit right now. So there's potential for the Orcs to kill them if the Slasher wants to throw himself in there. So turn 6, and Whip decides to attack the Immortal Guard for the lols. The Slasher decides to go into the Golems, because why not? If he doesn't do that, he's just going to lose the game, so you might as well go for it. And the Fireball onto the Dragonfire team does 4 damage, but I don't think it actually wavers it or anything. Whip doesn't get much accomplished there, sadly for him. Slasher does 7 damage to the golems, which isn't enough to remove them because they are happily inspired there as well. And the Slasher is now going to get killed, but it really had to take the risk to try and take them out, because otherwise it was just an auto loss. Turn 6 for the Abyssal Dwarves. So Infernock in the flank, Golems in the front, Slasher equals toast. Mortal Guard try and take out Whip, but they can't. The Dragonfire team does a bit more damage to the Horde, but not much. At this point, the mortars aren't successfully hitting anything. I think this Horde is actually too close, and it's blocking line of sight, so that mortar can't see anything else. And the other one has no viable targets, because everything's been in combat. We do get turn 7, though, so it's not just a win for the Abyssal Dwarves. In turn 7, there's a bit more Fireball, which takes out the Dragonfire team, which isn't going to affect the outcome. And nothing really going on there, so I'm going to win at this stage. But I do get my turn 7. And one of the heroes dies here, which is, I think it's the Standard Bearer, who charged into their flank for some reason, just for the lols. So he gets killed. This unit is on the 2-point objective. Infernock is on the 1-point objective quite happily. And this Horde is on the middle 1-point objective. Whereas the Orcs have their 2-pointer and the 1-pointer. So it is a win for the Abyssal Dwarves, 4 points to 3. It was the initial plan, and it pretty much worked out exactly as anticipated from the off. There was a few twists along the way, like Basusu getting wavered by the Gore Riders, which could have messed up my plans a bit, which then ended up with me having a less than optimal attack on the chariots with Bracky and the half-breeds, which got Bracky killed, and then they overrun into the half-breeds, so they both got killed at once. But I think, apart from that, everything went pretty smoothly. I think the dilemma that my opponent was put in with this unit of golems in the middle, I think it would have been better to try and kill them. One thing I think some people overlook in Kings of War is the fact that you should be, as well as getting in good positions to win the game, you want to be deleting units a lot. When you have the chance to kill something, especially something that's really tough with lots of heal nearby, you can't just chip away at them. You have to go all in and take things out. If you're not deleting units, then you'll end up, at the end of the game, look at this. There's 1 point of damage between these 3 units. Dash 17, dash 17, dash 20, all defense 6. And these were the units that I needed to win the game. So there was the option there. I presented my opponent with the option to take out this unit, and that option was not taken. Obviously, it wasn't a perfect choice because it would have left the unit open to attack on various sides. But I think when the opportunity presents itself, sometimes you've just got to go and delete something, just take off a unit, because I don't have a huge amount of units that can actually claim objectives in this army. And if you can just focus on them and just try and delete as many as possible, then you're going to give yourself a chance, I think, because I would have been stretched quite thin, because the Immortal Guard, there was no guarantee they were going to come out of this flank on top. And with that wall there, they're not even necessarily in a position to come and help out and claim an objective regardless. So you've just, when your opponent doesn't have that many objective scoring units, just delete when you can. And that's the main piece of advice I can give this game, I think. So what do I think about my list? I think it's obviously lacking in units, which didn't quite come back to bite me in this one, because I didn't lose that many of them. But it is lacking a bit. It's a bit heavy on the characters. And really, to take it from my Clash of Kings list into this, all I've really done is bring in a Mortar and an Ironcaster with the Shroud of the Saint and Surge, and also take out one of the Dragonfire teams to accommodate that, to get up to this point level. The other thing I could have done to my Clash of Kings list is just downgrade one of my magic artifacts and bring in a horde of Decimators, which aren't painted yet, but they could be in time for this tournament. Do I want to do that? Do I want a horde of Decimators? Are they that good in this edition? I've been looking at the 3rd edition rules for Decimators, which were leaked recently, and they look pretty solid. The regiments of Decimators and the hordes look pretty juicy in next edition. I'm still not sold on the troops of them for 3rd edition, though. I'll have to have a look at the other options in the list, see how the Dragonfire team looks, and look at the options for upgrades and the various auras and such before I make up my mind on the troops of Decimators, but they still look a bit overcosted for what they actually give you in the next edition as well, but we'll see. Too early to judge anything there. And speaking of 3rd edition, there's going to be juicy 3rd edition content coming at you very soon, and you can look forward to that. Until then, though, I think I can disappear, the arrow can disappear, and you can look at this beautiful thumbnail. So, am I going to change this list at all before the tournament? Maybe. I might not take this list. Hey, I might not even take Abyssal Dwarfs, you never know. Probably the last 2nd edition tournament, and it's actually a 2-dayer as well, so it's going to be worth quite a bit in the rankings, probably. Although, actually, it's in the new, I think it's in the new rankings season, so it might not actually be worth that much. So, we'll see. I'll see how that one shakes out. But I'm not too concerned with how many points each individual event is worth. My main focus, really, I just like trying to finish in the podium places and getting trophies for the trophy cabinet. That's my main goal these days. Because once you get your first trophy, you get a taste for it, and you just want to get more and more and more. And obviously, next season I would like to win another tournament or more. Preferably more, but I would take another. If I could win 1 tournament per season, I would accept that. After the first few seasons, not winning any. Managed to get 1 last season, so that was nice. And then, apart from that, I'll just quite happily rack up more 2nd and 3rd place trophies. I don't mind that at all. So, liking very much the Abyssal Dwarves. I'm liking the look of their changes in the next edition, actually. And I'll do a full video on them. I'll do a full one on the goblins. I'll do a full one on any other army I play. The undead. The ogres I've played a bit of as well. The League of Rordia aren't going to be in the initial book, so obviously we'll have to wait for me to cover those. But still, you can look forward to seeing that very soon. And more tournament coverage, more battle reports, more juicy goodness. And as soon as the 3rd edition book hits, I'm going to be doing an instant live stream, probably, and discussing it in detail live with the world, who can be reading it along with me, provided they've got it at the moment it's released. If not, they can just rely on my insight alone. Okay, time to wrap up this battle report, folks. And all that remains to be said, other than the fact that Abyssal Dwarves are pretty damn cool, is... Wait a minute, they're not cool at all. They're hot, spicy, and extra juicy and tender, succulent, red-hot, sizzling. But yeah, cool, that's more a goblin-y kind of thing, isn't it, with the snow? Right, now that we've got that cleared up, good night out there, whatever you are.